Just firstly, a little bit about the Warden of Readers role. So you'll know that I took on the role of interim Warden of Readers. I think it was last October, November time. And no one ever said what interim meant. I think the understanding was that I would hold the interim title until the lay ministry review was seen through, and we had a clearer idea of exactly how the different lay ministries in the church and the diocese would be held. As it happens, before that process has reached its completion, I've taken on a new role, Director of Mission and Ministry. And what that means is that I'm in a role now where I supervise, line manage, work with the Warden of Readers, although that's also me. So there is a complication there. On a more serious note, the role that I've taken on, for reasons I'll explain in a moment, is a particularly complex one. And so I'm not able to continue that specific role as Warden of Readers. But I am still working with readers because my role as Director of Mission and Ministry is a role that is very focused on lay ministry. So I can't tell you much more than that, apart from the fact that I am planning very soon to have a conversation with my wonderful assistants, Giles, Beryl and Peter, and to have a conversation about what care of readers might look like, at least going forward into such a place where we're a bit more clear as to what lay ministry in the diocese looks like. So apologies that I can't be clearer at this stage, but I hope that we can be a bit clearer shortly. Now, in respect of my new role, Director of Mission and Ministry, it is a new one in the diocese. Those of you with reasonably long memories will remember John Thompson. Some of you might have even, did any of you train under John Thompson when he was running Foundations? Yeah. When John was here, his title was Director of Ministry, and then he went off to become Bishop of Selby. And Stephen Croft at the time then decided that he wanted to expand the role of ministry in the church, lay and ordained, and so he appointed Christine Gore as the principal of the newly founded St Peter's College, which was this sort of digital learning community, and then Mark Cockayne, who headed up the parish support team working with mission action planning and those sort of things. And so for the last, 7 years or so, these two posts have been held working with each other, with one focusing on formation for lay ministry and formation of ministry more generally, the other working with parish support and so forth. Now, as it happens, both Mark and Christine retired this summer. I think Mark perhaps a little bit unexpectedly, and that suddenly left this gap opening up, and so the bishop had to decide, well, will we replace both like for like, or is this an opportunity to reconfigure the role altogether? And the decision was made that actually both those two roles occupied by Christine and Mark had sort of achieved their aims, and we were now with the diocesan strategy moving towards a new phase in our life together. And so this new role of Director of Mission and Ministry has been created, and I'm the one who, for better or worse, has been selected to take that particular role on. Now, what that means is that I've inherited two teams that have been working together, but also separately. And in some respects, I've inherited two roles. Now, 4 into 2 doesn't go. So when I think of stepping into one pair of shoes, well, both Christine and Mark are big shoes to fill. To step into both pairs of shoes feels, absolutely impossible, and I wouldn't be foolish enough to try. So one of my roles over this next year is to bring those two teams together so that we have a greater sense of coordination as we work with mission and ministry across the diocese. And in doing this, so there will inevitably be reconfigurations of how previous roles have been conducted and who looks after them. So The roles that the parish support team were involved in before included such things as mission action planning, the Centenary Project, digital church, new congregations, Breathe Deep and youth work and so on. That was all under the parish support team and Mark. And then Christine and the St Peter's College team were looking at foundations, lay ministry training and formation, online and digital resourcing, focal ministry, leading well, and things like that. And those aspects of life in the diocese, I very much hope will continue, and I'll be overseeing a lot of that, but we're going to be looking at different ways in terms of how these things can work and how they're supervised. The team, which is yet to be named, that's going to come together from these two teams, will be charged with assisting individuals, congregations and mission areas to grow into their calling as disciples of Jesus and communities of disciples. Now, the point that will probably be of immediate interest to you is that of the lay ministry review, which is the other main part of my role in my first year in post. The first part is bringing the two teams together. The second part is actually working out and implementing the lay ministry review. This proposal of the lay ministry review went to Synod in July, and some questions came back from Synod. I believe it's due to return this November. So what I'm about to say about lay ministry review is still in one sense in draft form, although I think it's fairly solidly draft now, because we haven't yet fully received Synod's approval to it. So let me just, so this looks slightly complicated, but it gives a kind of idea of one of the main strands that we're looking at. The lay ministry review is looking at ways that we can equip disciples of Jesus in local contexts or diocesan, deanery, mission area contexts and even national contexts to fulfil their calling and to be equipped to do what they sense God is asking them to do. Now, the situation that we have had over the last few years, I'm sure you'll be familiar with. Obviously, we've had reader training and readers. There have also been authorised lay ministers such as parish evangelists, pastoral assistants, and so forth. We've also had people trained up through Aurora to become children's workers, families workers, and so forth. And that's all fine. One of the questions that I think we're asking ourselves is, well, what about people who don't neatly fit into any one established category? What if you really feel that you're called to work by leading a natter group, for instance, or leading small groups? What about those starting new congregations in non-traditional parish contexts? How do we work with them? There's also the question of focal ministry as well, which, as you know, is becoming increasingly to the fore, and we're training more and more focal ministers up for their role as well. So the old model of having just a few quite tightly defined roles in lay ministry is something that we have been looking at as part of the lay ministry review and seeing what that might look like. And one of the things that we've come up with is this Toblerone, really. So if I can just explain it, you will see on the diagram that the triangle has three categories: national, diocese, and local. And national, diocese, and local talk about the particular areas, arenas, that you may be authorised to serve in. So if you are if you're going to serve in a national ministry, then you would be licensed as readers. So you will know as readers you have been licensed, and your license is portable. If you move to the other side of the country, you carry your license with you, and provided the sending diocese is happy that you are a credible minister, and the receiving diocese is happy that they wish you to serve in their diocese, then you can be a reader in that diocese. It is a nationally recognised ministry, and that is why training for reader ministry has to fulfil certain criteria. There is a kind of a church equivalent of Ofsted that makes sure that readers across the country have similar levels of training, so that you don't get a reader from one part of the country who's had very little training moving to a part of the country where they expect readers to have a very high level of training. That's what makes it nationally portable. Church Army is something similar. If you're a Church Army evangelist, you will have a national licence that will enable you, again, provided dioceses and congregations are happy to receive you, you can be a Church Army evangelist across the country. So that is national licensing. Then there is the diocese. That's working across our diocese. And these are some of the roles that we've already talked about. So at the moment, a parish evangelist who's done the training through foundations and other training on top of that will be authorised to serve in their local context. But if they move churches within the diocese, that training will be held to suffice should they wish to continue to be a parish evangelist. It's not necessarily the case that if they move to another part of the country, they could still be a parish evangelist. They might be if a diocese was happy that the training they received here was the same as they were giving, but it's not the same as being a reader. And so authorised ministries in this diocese include things like focal ministers. It includes spiritual accompaniers, and it includes some of the recognised authorised ministries that we've already mentioned. And then there is local ministry, and this is something which we haven't really looked at before. Now, I imagine all of our churches will have people who are doing ministries that don't have a specific title to them. They will be the sort of people that I've mentioned, those who are leading natter courses, those who are small group leaders, perhaps those who are parts of prayer ministry teams and so forth. And up to now, they've been getting on with things, but they haven't necessarily been trained to do what they've been doing, nor have they necessarily been recognised as actually having any sense of ministry and authority in that church. Some churches may, some churches won't. And so we're looking at the idea of locally commissioning ministers to mission areas. So that if you've got a prayer ministry team in a mission area, you would want them to have a certain degree of training. You'd want them obviously to do safeguarding training, but there may be particular other areas of training in terms of intercession, prayer, pastoral care that might be right for them to make them as effective in their calling as they can be. And it might not be appropriate to say to them, well, you've got to do foundations. You can't be a prayer minister until you've been through foundations or a diocesan recognised course. Because that puts a little bit of a burden on local ministers who are just wanting to get on and do what Jesus is asking them to do. So the idea of locally commissioning is going to be looking at local resources that may well be provided by the parish support team. They may well be provided by the parish and the mission area themselves to enable people with a particular calling to work in that area, and then they'd be commissioned within their mission area in their church to go and do what they're doing. Now, the important thing about this triangle is, and the way that Jane Truman, who designed this, set this up, is that it's not a pyramid. So the idea isn't that you've got readers at the top and Church Army evangelists because they've been licensed, and so they're have somehow more status than others and more status than others. The idea of this kind of Toblerone shape is that actually there is an equality in ministry. People who have gone through different areas of training, They may be called to different kinds of ministry, but actually they will be working together with their oversight minister, with other ministers within their mission area to do what Jesus is asking them to do. Now, I know one of the burning questions that I've been asked as warden of readers, and I know others have been asked as well, is what does it mean for readers in the new lay ministry model? And I do once again stress that this is draft until Synod agree it, but the very fact that we've included nationally licensed as part of our Toblerone piece should, I hope, reassure you that there is not an intention that we are simply going to axe reader training. We may look at different ways at how it's done and who provides that training, but this does not in itself suggest that you're a dying breed of readers who and there's going to be no more readers trained in the diocese. That is not, as far as I'm aware, the intention at all, and this diagram seems to me to make that reasonably clear. Anyone, any questions? As I said, I've only been a week into this job, and so I'm very much, I suppose, I'm more in case of answering still with my warden of readers hat on than with my DMM hat on. But if there are any questions that you want to ask, I can at least tell you I don't know the answer.
In all of them, you've got local supervision and support, and in fact, when we did our reader training, that actually was never covered. And I know it can mean many different things to different people. Is there any kind of fleshed out view of what that means?
So when you say it wasn't covered, so I mean, so local supervision and support would mean local supervision and support for the reader. Yeah. So you should all have had a ministry agreement.
Yes. That doesn't cover supervision and support, as I understand it, which is.
I think our understanding of that would be that good practice would be that a reader would be regularly meeting with their oversight minister in order to have supervision, to discuss their ministry, to look at, to line manage, if you want to use that word. I'm always slightly careful about that word in parish ministry, and support supervision that way. That's my understanding. Is that right?
Unless I dozed through it.
Right.
That was never covered in the ministry training.
Well, any good ministry review, ministry agreement should have that on it, and any half-decent oversight minister should be meeting regularly with their readers. And if they're not, then that's something to flag up. Jonathan.
Be a fly in the ointment. How would, this might not be an easy question to answer, how would you understand to be regularly?
On a personal level, I've always believed 4 to 6 weeks. Although it does depend, I think, on the level of ministry that a reader is undertaking. So if there is a reader who is preaching regularly, leading services regularly, by which I mean probably monthly or at least, as well as involved in pastoral visiting, then I think 4 to 6 weeks of catching up is good practice. But some readers, for all sorts of reasons, may actually be doing a far gentler ministry than that, in which case common sense might suggest that perhaps termly is good practice. I think it's probably how long's a piece of string.
Can I just ask Toby, can you repeat the question?
Sorry, yes, yeah.
Unless I dozed through it, that was never mentioned at all, nor any time scale. And in the ministry review, there is not, as far as, unless I'm missing it completely, there's no section which says, has supervision taken place, what's the regularity, is it meeting the needs of both partners, the kind of thing we're professionally used to.
Yes, yeah.
Unless and I'd love to have it pointed out to me, I can't see it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm trying to think back to my ministry reviews, and none of my readers or former readers are here. Some of them might be watching on the video now and jumping up and down and saying, what a hypocrite, he never did any of this. In which case, I'm really glad you're not in the room. My memories of the agreements that we had at St Chad's were that it did include the regularity of supervision as part of that.
But they would be spoke to St Chad's presumably, because we've been using the ones which are generated centrally by the diocese.
Yeah, in which case, to be honest, that is something that needs to be looked at. That is, I think, a bit of a surprise. But I am very aware, having talked to a number of readers over the last few months, that supervision is sporadic and sometimes absent, and I'm aware that there are issues with supervision.
When that is considered, also consider how it's handled in interregnum.
Yeah.
We haven't had anything for a year and a bit.
Yes, yeah, and that is again a difficult point, and I'll stick my hand up and say that I've not made arrangement for either of my readers at St Chad's to be supervised during the interregnum. Sorry if you're watching.
So I think there's something about responsibility and partnership about the agreement, and if the amount of supervision is not working for you, then that's for you to say I need more, and if your incumbent or your supervisor has got issues or problems, then it's for them to say I think we need to meet more often. That's a healthy mentoring relationship that we should be trying to develop. And if that's not working because there are personalities or problems in that relationship, then there's an opportunity to bring somebody else in if it needs to be done soon. But there's the 5-year review process that allows you to sort of talk about that with somebody else who understands how the system works. So
Yeah.
there are some checks and balances in the system.
Sorry to be controversial, because we did the 5-year reviews and being briefed how to do them. Again, it might be completely stupid, but we were never told to ask about the quality of supervision.
Yeah, I'd only say that obviously as part of this, new ministry agreements are likely to be written and well, it says local supervision and support, so that would be part of it.
I think supervision is quite a sort of new notion. That might explain the variety of experiences. So you've got some who'll see supervision as being a bit more like sort of line management, others will see it more like mentoring, others will see it more like accompanying. So in the counselling and therapeutic traditions and so on, the supervisor is someone who's alongside, but there's no hint of kind of oversight. Whereas I think in church structures, there's always that element of oversight coming in, literally the oversight minister. I think we're still figuring out what supervision means. But speaking personally as a spiritual accompanier who has a supervisor and having done sort of counselling with a supervisor, I think there's a lot to be said for having the person alongside that I can be honest with about my struggles, my hopes, and so on, without it being sort of quoted back to me. And I think that's starting to happen a bit with some of the clergy groups. Group supervision is quite a good way of kind of getting into it, because you're sharing with your peers, and it means you're using the supervisor's time more efficiently. But I think clergy is starting to get into these groups now, but I think a similar sort of tradition might be worth exploring for reader ministry as well. Supervision groups, which I suspect may be the kind of supervision. No,
it isn't. I'm used to professional line management
that's
supervision.
Yeah.
And actually, when I've inquired about it, my understanding is that priests don't have line management supervision. That's what I've been told. But currently, there's the idea to bring them into groups, but it's still voluntary. Whereas I come from a tradition where supervision is a requirement of good professional practice.
Yes, priests are not line managed. And at least not in a formal sense, which there are all sorts of historic reasons for that.
I mean, it makes a bit from I'm not a counsellor, but the counselling model is anybody who practices in a caring profession should have critical, supportive, reflective supervision to be a good practitioner.
And it is being brought in to the diocese. There is a recognition of that, but agreed, we are very far behind many other professions in that.
So
Sorry.
recommendations was in the I forget the title of the report that came out from the National Church about support for clergy.
Yeah.
One of the main conclusions from that was the need for supervision because it helps clergy, or lay ministers come to that,
Yeah.
can otherwise feel burdened or obstructed in some ways in the ministry because they haven't got that sort of outlet. But it does sound like just from this bit of discussion that we need to kind of look at what we mean by supervision in the context of lay ministry,
Yeah.
specifically reader ministry.
Yeah. Giles.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that the expression of lay ministry is so broad that the nature of the supervision won't lend itself to a single hierarchical structural approach, which then requires those doing the supervision to actually be quite well versed in the nature of supervision. What I was going to come back to was the comment about interregnum, because during interregnum, of course, readers are expected to step up. And it's not my experience that outgoing clergy have done a great deal, possibly beyond making sure communion happens once a month, to do any transfer of lay ministry within their remit. So I was just going to say, if any reader is in interregnum and feels that they're swamped, struggling or whatever, you can talk to the area dean, you can talk to Toby, or if you're desperate, you can talk to the archdeacon.
Or the assistant wardens of readers, I'd also say.
Well, we are here to help, yes.
I think maybe one of the issues that we've got is that nobody has any time to devote to this, and part of the reason for that is that we've got reduced manpower. We've got reduced manpower in terms of incumbents, and we've got reduced manpower in terms of readers too, because whilst you're talking about having these nationally licensed people, which includes readers, we've not had a pipeline in the diocese for several years now. And nothing that you've said so far indicates that there's any idea as to when that might start again.
Well, if this goes through synod at November, at that point, the lay ministry review is complete, implementation starts. At that point, we'll be looking to restart training for all those three. And as soon as that training is in place or appropriate providers have been found, then people will be able to apply for it and going through. So we're still, I mean, Dan, Christian and I are doing a vocations morning in November where we'll be talking to people and finding out where they're sensing the calling. I know that there are people who are sensing a calling to reader ministry because they've been in touch with me. So then it's a matter of finding the appropriate ways in which they can be trained to do that.
And how long do you envisage that training taking? It's like there'll be various people in the room who've been on various different routes for years, from 6 months to 3 years. How long is the lag before we get any new readers?
I can't answer that question at the moment.
Can I just clarify from what you were saying at the introduction, Toby? Are you warden of readers still for a finite period, or are you indefinitely warden of readers? So I think probably what I have to say is that I'm not warden of readers because I've now taken up this diocesan role. I am acting it until such time as we can find not a replacement as such, but find a way in which readers can be cared for. But one of the things that I have done since taking over is work very closely with my 3 assistants and indeed give them, I hope I'm right in saying this, giving you more opportunity to do things. So it's not just down to me, there are 4 of us. Yeah. Would there be an eventual intention to have a warden of readers who was a chief reader, as it were?
I think the nearest I can say is that there'll be an eventual intention that there will be someone who has specified care of readers. Yeah. I'm not sure I would want to talk titles or what that sort of person might be.
But would that person be a reader or not, if you see what I mean? Or is it open?
I think it's still open actually at the moment. But if there's any reader who says, you know what, I think I could really do this role and I'd like to, then get in touch and I'd be very willing to have a conversation with you about it.
All over the queue during the comfort break.
Going back to this local supervision and support. Over at St Nicholas, we're in the never-ending intrigue. These will never get the priest.
Is that Rycroft?
Yeah. But I mean, I'm the only lay person there, other than church boys. But the thing is, if I want support, let's say, from man over there, I go to the Bickleton chapter and I ask the priest for support and advice. And if I happen to bump into Peter here, he'll get it. Then this blessing, he's been one of my mentors for 20 odd years. So I think everybody has got somebody to refer to. And I don't see where anyone could say, I haven't got support. And on top of that, you've only got to have a word with the Almighty, then you get support.
It's Peter, is it? Peter has just commented that he is at St Nicholas Rycroft, where they haven't had a priest for a very, very long time, and that he's found support in the Hickleton chapter through Peter Rainsford, who's been his mentor, and also a word with the Almighty. And I think that's probably quite a good moment to stop and have refreshments. Thank you.